The year is 2005, and Poland has just elected a new right-wing government seeking to put as much distance between itself and its communist past as possible. One of Prime Minister Kazimierz Macynkiewicz's first actions is to begin the release of a treasure trove of over 1,700 documents airing out the Soviet Union's previously classified dirty laundry. The task at hand? Showcase, beyond any doubt, that Poland has been an unwilling participant in the Warsaw Pact the entire time. Among the many revealing documents, one stood out above the rest: a chilling Eastern Bloc military plan outlining a drive into Western Europe that would have kicked off World War III. While many have heard of the numerous close calls with nuclear annihilation during the Cold War, few know the details of how the apocalypse would have really gone down. And this is that story. Known as the 7 Days to the Rhine River, the Warsaw Pact's official planned response to any NATO advances or strikes into Eastern Bloc states would have taken shock and awe to a whole new level. At its core was a large-scale launch of tactical nuclear weapons, followed by a massive conventional ground operation that would overwhelm NATO and cripple the alliance. Mad as it seems to us now, this plan was the logical conclusion of several fatally flawed Cold War theories: that tactical nuclear weapons could ever be used without escalating things all the way to mutually assured destruction, that NATO's cohesion was much less strong than publicly declared and would rapidly fall apart when put to the test, and that the Warsaw Pact's armies were capable of executing a cross-continental operation. That operation included punching from Eastern Europe to the Rhine River along the border with France in just 7 days, leaving a trail of nuclear annihilation and destruction in its wake. And no, your geography doesn't fail you, that's a crazy distance. Covering it in just a week would be the fastest military operation of its scale in history. But that was kind of the point. Hit the West hard and fast, and fulfill 3 key goals. Number 1, shock and awe. The Warsaw Pact planned to use tactical nuclear weapons across continental Europe to devastate key targets. This would be followed by a swift and overwhelming ground invasion aimed at neutralizing NATO within days. 2, cut off reinforcements. A key objective was to prevent the United States from being able to pour in reinforcements. The highest priority would be Frankfurt Air Base, which served as a pivotal logistical hub for NATO forces. 3, eliminate leadership. All targeted Western European states were to have their heads of state eliminated, who would then be replaced by Soviet-backed puppet governments. The scale of this plan's targets reflects its brutal approach. Mushroom clouds would have risen over major European cities, including Copenhagen, Amsterdam, The Hague, and Brussels. Even Vienna, despite Austria not being a member of NATO, was on the list to be annihilated. The message from the East was clear: neutrality offered no protection. Crucially, the Soviets wanted to cut off NATO's ability to send in reinforcements. Frankfurt Air Base was to be a top target. Destroying the base and similar ones throughout the continent would ensure that American reinforcements could not reach the conflict area in time to mount a meaningful counteroffensive. There were also plans for ruthless territorial expansion. Austria would fall under Hungarian control, while West Germany would be taken and divided by Czech and Hungarian forces. These land grabs were designed to encircle the forces already in Europe and to collapse any attempt at organizing a resistance. As the conventional ground war began, it would be critical to swiftly replace any existing governments in invaded countries with Soviet-backed puppets. And the goal was clear: a total dismantling of the existing liberal order, ensuring that there would be no political opposition in the aftermath of the invasion. The plan also detailed the invasion and occupation of Luxembourg, Belgium, and the Netherlands, annexing them into the Warsaw Pact sphere of influence. This expansion was designed to consolidate Soviet control over Western Europe, completely and dramatically reshaping the continent's political landscape. And this plan was not just a series of military objectives, but also a psychological strategy. The Soviets believed that such a rapid punch beyond their borders would so demoralize NATO states that they would be forced to capitulate rather than escalate to full-scale nuclear war. Noticeably, the 2 nuclear-armed Western states, France and the United Kingdom, were left off the initial list of strikes. It seems the Warsaw Pact states gambled that by only using tactical nukes on non-nuclear armed states, NATO's nuclear powers wouldn't dare respond with nukes of their own, thereby avoiding Armageddon. Staggeringly, the plan didn't stop here, although there was disagreement between Eastern Bloc states as to the feasibility of what would come next. The next leg of the campaign was to press onwards beyond the Rhine into France in just another 7 days. But while even some at the time thought such a move was foolish, we here in the present day can see that the whole plan was like that. Far from being key to a communist victory, 7 days to the Rhine could have doomed us all. The assumptions that formed the backbone of the Warsaw Pact's plan were badly wrong. And not just wrong. They were so spectacularly wrong that they could have ended all life on Earth. NATO doctrine held that an attack on one meant an attack on all. That wasn't a secret. It's right there in Article 5 of the Alliance's Charter. The Warsaw Pact clearly viewed this as a bluff, which makes us glad that they never played poker, because NATO doctrine can basically be summed up as, you nuke any one of our members and we are gonna nuke you right back. And 7 days to the Rhine called for more than just a single bomb being dropped as a warning. 200 tactical nukes would have rained down across the continent, smaller than their multi-megaton strategic cousins, but still containing up to 500 kilotons of explosive and radioactive material. For comparison, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima contained just 15 kilotons. Much of Western Europe would have been left uninhabitable. Not that it would have just been Western Europeans who suffered. The Warsaw Pact soldiers who drove west would have been marching across radioactive wastelands, occupying ghost cities that were little more than irradiated craters. Supply lines across major roads would be rendered impassable by nuclear fallout, making the Warsaw Pact's long-standing struggles with logistics almost an impossibility. Managing what was left of civilian populations in these devastated areas would have posed another challenge. In short, this plan would have killed or sickened an insane number of people on both sides, even if NATO had somehow refrained from wiping out Moscow in response. But more to the point, it would have ended life in Western Europe as we know it. The communist puppet governments, set up in nations like Germany and the Netherlands, would have only existed on paper, overseeing empty countries of just destruction. And that's assuming that the Eastern Bloc's armies ever got far enough to install new leaders. The idea of punching from Eastern Europe to the Rhine River in just a week was a pipe dream, up there with Putin's special military operation to take Kiev in 3 days. How did that go? Even without reinforcements, the United States alone had over 400,000 active duty soldiers stationed in Europe at the height of the Cold War. The idea that they were simply going to lay down arms is just fanciful. Similarly, taking out Frankfurt Air Base would have been a hindrance to flooding the continent with reinforcements, until you realize that there were almost 60 other bases across Western Europe. While many of them would also be targets, it would be impossible to cut off NATO entirely. Even a surface-level analysis of how this plan would have rolled out shows it was based on heroic assumptions. Not only were Warsaw Pact troops expected to march through radioactive wastelands with either minimal or potentially zero protection, but NATO was also expected to just be all like,
nah, it's chill. You can bomb our cities and we're not gonna fight back or do anything. We'll just put down our guns right here for you, okay?
But of course, that's not what would have happened. NATO would have fought back. And it's here that we get to the next destructive part of alternate universe Armageddon today. The part where Western Europe retaliates. Now, the Cold War was a time of mutual distrust, so it shouldn't come as a surprise that the West had its own plans for something like this and how to respond. Unlike the Warsaw Pact, which had the plan relatively consistent throughout much of the Cold War, there were several corresponding Western plans throughout the decades. Similarly to that of 7 days to the River Rhine, the Western plans all assumed a first strike by the Warsaw Pact on NATO, and the first edition of the Alliance's plan called for a similarly dramatic response. This would have seen nukes rain down on industrial strongholds throughout Eastern Europe, wiping cities like Warsaw and Prague off the map. But the destruction would not have stopped there. NATO's follow-on forces attack, FOFA doctrine, aimed to punch deep behind the Iron Curtain, targeting railways and supply chains before they could reach the battlefield. The very fabric of civilization in Eastern Europe would have been reduced to something out of a post-apocalyptic sci-fi thriller. It's pretty scary stuff, but luckily for the Soviets, the NATO plan didn't remain so inflexibly apocalyptic for long. President Kennedy amended it shortly after taking office, making it far less rigid. At times, it also excluded France after President Charles de Gaulle withdrew from NATO's integrated military structure. Rather than one event triggering what was widely recognized to be a doomsday scenario, the Kennedy plan gave the President of the United States a series of options in terms of how to respond. Make no mistake, some of these responses still included the metaphorical pushing of a big red button marked kaboom, but there were now other non-nuclear options that at the very least represented a step back from the brink. This meant a shift from a policy of destruction to a policy of deterrence, a move not reciprocated by Moscow. After French President Charles de Gaulle withdrew from NATO's integrated military command in 1966, Paris forged its own course in determining how it would respond to any Soviet advance. While it often sought to seek a third way between Washington and Moscow, it would not have let itself be invaded and occupied for the third time in a century. While its plans largely focused on deterrence, any Warsaw Pact advance into French territory would have been met with, at a minimum, by the use of tactical nukes, making the planned invasion even less plausible. So, reading plans like these today can send a chill down your spine. Nuclear bombs falling on Vienna, Copenhagen, and Brussels is all but unthinkable. Even for those who study the Cold War, it is easy to forget just how close to the brink we came on more than one occasion. Despite how fanciful the plan was, and how, with the benefit of hindsight, it is almost certain that they would have not achieved any of their military or political objectives, we mustn't forget that this was official Warsaw Pact doctrine. In the event of perceived Western invasions, strikes, or launches, this plan would commence, with all the untold death and suffering that would have been unleashed. And the emphasis on perceived there is not just for dramatic effect. The Cold War was rife with false alarms, close calls, and near misses. In 1961, 10 Soviet and 10 American tanks came face-to-face at Checkpoint Charlie, nearly igniting a new war. Similarly, in 1983, the Soviet nuclear early warning system falsely reported a launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile, followed by 4 additional Phantom launches. If not for the decision by the officer on duty to await further corroborating evidence that the US was indeed launching missiles, the Soviets would have launched a retaliatory strike against NATO. Had 7 days to the River Rhine ever been set into motion, it is almost certain that none of us would be here to watch this. We can only thank God, or fate, or sheer blind luck that no one was ever crazy enough to activate it.